I'm Carmen Blair, the Deputy Director of the San Mateo County Historical Association, and I would like to welcome you to today's Courthouse Docket. The Courthouse Docket is a regular series of lectures and performances held here in historic Courtroom A. Each month, we explore a different theme of local history. As June is Pride Month, we wanted to explore LGBTQ+ history on the peninsula. We are pleased to have with us Michael Flanagan, a San Mateo and Menlo Park Library reference librarian and history columnist for the Bay Area Reporter. He was president of the AIDS Archival Organization Documentation of AIDS Issues and Research from 1987 through 1995, which provided materials for group materials AIDS Timeline for the 1991 Whitney Biennial. In addition to writing for the Bay Area Reporter, he has worked and published in multiple scholarly periodicals. He has lectured at the Beat Museum and the Yerba Buena Center. Please welcome Michael Flanagan.
Thank you very much. Today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ history on the peninsula and its environs. This is a version of a talk that I first started giving on Zoom in 2020. One difference is that this year I'm going to be discussing sources and potential avenues of future research. And the reason that I'm doing that is because this is my last year as a librarian. I'm retiring, so I am considering this my way of handing it off to other people. So this talk was done both at the San Mateo Public Library and also at the Menlo Park Libraries. And part of the reason why it's difficult to envision a peninsula LGBTQ history is because of the influence of San Francisco on the area. But it is true that the peninsula has a distinct LGBTQ history. And just so you know, this talk runs about 45 minutes long. There will be time at the end for questions and answers. One place that exerted a lot of influence on LGBTQ history on the peninsula is Stanford University, as we'll see throughout this talk. These gentlemen are an example of why documenting this history has been difficult. They were on what was called the Great White Fleet that President Teddy Roosevelt sent around the world, mostly to exert naval power, but also as a goodwill ambassador, or so he said. When it sailed into San Francisco Bay in May of 1908, these men were taken off board the USS New Jersey and charged with sodomy, and eventually sent to San Quentin. At the time, there was no naval code against sodomy, and they had to be charged under California law, and there was also no naval jail facility, so they needed to be sent to San Quentin. These photos are from the GLBT Historical Society, and they were found by a researcher after the fact. At the time that it happened, there was no reporting on the press that this happened. So, and I've searched the Chronicle and the Examiner as well as local newspapers, and there was nothing in the local press about it. You could excuse that off as saying that it was because there had recently been plague in the area, and also because of the earthquake that was 2 years before that. But I tend to think that it was because they were skittish about putting this information in the paper. This is Alan L. Hart, an American physician and radiology pioneer. Dr. Hart attended Stanford in 1910, and while there, began going to San Francisco's Tenderloin neighborhood and exploring his gender identity. He began to wear men's clothes, and in 1917, He was one of the first people in the United States to obtain gender-affirming care, and by that I mean surgery in this case, and transition his gender. One of the reasons that we know about Dr. Hart is because one of the people who he was in medical school with outed him to the press in 1918. He revealed that Dr. Hart had been Lucille Hart. And this is from the Daily Capital Journal in Oregon, and it's from February 5th of 1918. Dr. Hart's story was told by his transgender historian Lou Sullivan in a pamphlet that was produced in San Francisco in 1985. This is the well-known activist Harry Hay, who attended Stanford in 1930 to 1931. In his biography, he tells that he publicly declared to his friends that he was homosexual in 1931, and he reported losing about 95% of his friends. The other 5% said, who cares? He dropped out in 1932. He went on to be a founding member of the Mattachine Society, the first gay organization in the United States, in 1950. You'll notice as I go through this talk that you will see several books. That's partially because I'm a librarian, but also because this is where the information comes from. And we know about Hay and his history because of biographers like Stuart Timmons, who published the biography of Hay in 1990. This is Henry Cowell, a noted composer who lived in Menlo Park. He became an accomplished composer in 1916 while attending UC Berkeley. He was arrested on a morals charge in 1936 when a student who had been attempting to blackmail him went to the police. It was front page news in the San Mateo Times. Wow. If you see across the top, professor held in morals charge, and then Henry Cowell, composer in Redwood Jail, right in the center there. It was also headline news in San Francisco. Unfortunately, this was the way that the topic of homosexuality was most generally presented to the public, as a crime reported in the newspaper. The Examiner went so far as to present pictures of the composer behind bars. And you can just imagine how people in that era felt when they saw these pictures. It was a cautionary tale. It was the sort of thing like, do not be too out in public, because if you do, you could wind up in jail. Now we are moving ahead a decade and a half to the 1950s. This is the poet Tom Gunn, who moved to Palo Alto in 1954 from the United Kingdom. At the time he moved here, he had already published openly gay poetry. This is a book of his letters, which was published in 2021, and it contains a footnote mentioning his going to gay bars in San Francisco in 1954. And I'm going to read you that footnote right now. This is referred to from a letter from December 16th, 1954, and he was living on 334 Lincoln Avenue in Palo Alto. Tony and Charlotte Herbold took Tom Gunn to his first gay bar, the Black Cat, remember that, we'll be back to it in a minute, in San Francisco. They went in the company of a woman called Mary, Tom Gunn's date. The bar, Tom Gunn told Robert Prager, was a great revelation to me. Gay bars were enjoyable, though Mary kept saying, "Those poor men, I feel sorry for them." I wasn't feeling sorry for them, he said. I could see they were having fun. And I realized that I could have fun there too, so I went back the next night by myself. A transcript of Tom Gunn's interview with Prager can be found in the GLBT Historical Society archives. description came out, but you deal with what you have. This is Mike Catay, who moved to the peninsula to be with Tom Gunn from Texas. They were together until Gunn's death in 2004, and Gunn considered him his spouse. Catay was involved in theater productions on the peninsula in the 50s and 60s, and is still living. So he could be interviewed to discuss the LGBTQ environment on the peninsula. Here's an excerpt of a letter from Gunn to the author Christopher Isherwood about Catay's work from 1961. This is from 1959. This is a play called Six Appeal, which was at the Pagliacci Playhouse here in Redwood City. This letter is from December 11th, 1961. It's wonderful having Mike back in California. After we've been apart for any length of time, we always have a difficult time for a few months, as I guess many people do. But those months are over now. He works his ass off directing a review on the peninsula, which starts at the end of this month. Gunn's move to the Bay Area drew others, including Dr. Oliver Sacks, who moved here in 1961 with the express purpose of meeting Tom Gunn. He was another British person who moved to the Bay Area. Although Gunn was already going to gay bars in San Francisco, there were bars on the peninsula as well. They were usually in out-of-the-way or unincorporated areas. This is an article from the Chronicle from February 20th, 1956, about a raid on the bar Hazel's Inn in Sharp Park. Sharp Park was unincorporated at the time. It became part of Pacifica when it incorporated in 1957. And that's Hazel Nicola in the center of this article here. And you can see the people hiding their faces from the camera there on the left-hand side. Hazel Nicola was, for all intents and purposes, for all we know, heterosexual, but she enjoyed having the club. And when she was put on trial for having the club later, she said, "We weren't causing any problems and people knew what was going on there." So she did not see it as being a problem.
Hazel's Inn? Hazel's?
Hazel's Inn.
Yeah.
Hazel's Inn. And this is the first bar raid that we know of on the peninsula. Okay. In the San Mateo Times article of the same day, the county sheriff said, "The purpose of this raid was to let it be known that we are not going to tolerate gatherings of homosexuals in this county." Locals had their names and addresses listed in the paper. And one possible area of research, since these people are probably no longer with us, would be to find out what happened to the people that were arrested in this raid. I've done some of this research on other people. There's one that is coming up that I'll mention, using Ancestry.com. The same month as the raid on Hazel's Inn, there were 23 men arrested in a sting operation at the Southern Pacific Train Depot's men's room in Palo Alto. The Palo Alto police chief attributed this behavior in the restroom to people from San Francisco being driven down to the peninsula because of raids in the city. And this is an Examiner article from February 4th, 1956. Although the police chief attributed the activity to San Francisco, there were 7 Stanford students who were given leaves of absence, kicked out in other words, because of the raid. The dean of students said the students would be allowed to re-register when the university received medical evidence of their rehabilitation. That wasn't the only raid in Palo Alto. Another raid of the Southern Pacific restroom in Palo Alto occurred in January of 1959. 24 men were arrested when the police installed cameras to record activity in the restroom. And I don't know if you can see it here, but the names and addresses of the people appeared in the article as well. And I, again, wonder whether or not these people were permanently affected by this arrest. Some were, some weren't. This is an ad from the Chronicle on November 11th, 1961, when the Sabre Club opened in Brisbane. The After Night Falls column from the same day described the bar as having naughty 90s fun with a banjo player with piano accompaniment. The bar was featured the following week in the Owl Steps Out column, and I'm going to read you those columns now. There's a point to this, and I'll get to it in just a second. Brisbane Glamour. The new Sabre Club has brought glamour to Brisbane, the lost city described in a recent Chronicle story. Emphasis is on fun, with the naughty 90s atmosphere, entertainment, and costume cuties serving the biggest glasses of beer in town. Banjo wizard Charlie Sabella, with piano accompaniment, plays for old-fashioned community sings on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. The do-it-yourself city makes a colorful comeback with the exciting new Sabre Club owned by Robert Mackle. And I've looked for Robert Mackle in historical sources and cannot find him. And this is from the Owl Steps Out by Hal Schaefer. This was a nightlife column. To get to the new Sabre Club in Brisbane, turn to your right at Brisbane. Follow the road right to the front door. You're in for a big treat when Charlie Sabella and his banjo play tunes of the naughty 90s, and you join in singing. You won't realize that you have such a good voice. Okay, so at the same time that they were running ads in the Chronicle and having its naughty 90s parties, the Sabre Club was having gay events. This was a party advertised in the LCE News, which was the first gay newspaper in the Bay Area. And this is from June 11th of 1962, and the party is mentioned in a column in the same newspaper. And this is from June. By August, the Sabre Club was getting a little bit more frisky in its ad. Note that this ad indicates that everything flames at the bar. The Sabre Club lasted until May of 1964, when it was closed for permitting lewd acts by homosexuals on the premises. And this is the last print record that I could find of the club. I have contacted the Brisbane Historical Society, and nobody there has any information on it. So this only exists in newspaper clippings so far. Now, the interesting thing is that there is another site called the Cracked Pot in Redwood City, and it also was a folk music spot. So I don't know what the connection between folk music and gay bars was in the 1950s, but for some reason there was one. The Cracked Pot in Redwood City was another spot that featured both folk music and was a social spot for gay men. And it was the club where the Kingston Trio was discovered, although at the time they were performing there, it was not known as a gay club. And this is an article from the LGBT Historical Society newsletter in 1987. Marv Shaw was a columnist for the LGBT Historical Society, and I'm just going to read you what it says. Finally, about 1960, a completely gay bar appeared, the Cracked Pot, in an unincorporated area south of Redwood City. It had started out as a relatively straight place for entertainment. It was actually one of the first gigs for the Kingston Trio. At first, there was an attempt at decor. Beaded evening bags tacked to the wall. Sal, the genial straight owner, made no effort whatsoever to make it more attractive, so it remained a dump for its entire existence, but a very profitable dump, with crowds on most nights. More gay men were moving to the Mid-Peninsula, so the clientele changed regularly. Still, it was ours, and we loved it. Sal made enough money to buy the Pagliacci and converted it to a nightclub called the Derby, which folded. The pot was eventually torn down to be replaced by Ben Frank's, most apropos. Okay, in August of 1962, the Carriage Bar at 1149 El Camino Real in Menlo Park was raided, and 5 men were arrested for soliciting other men for lewd acts. Names and addresses were released in this Examiner article. And you can see it mentions that a psychiatrist and a professor were netted in the raid. I followed up on tracing the psychiatrist, and the good news is that he continued to practice for over 20 years. So this did not destroy his life, although I'm sure at the time it was very upsetting to him. And this is an article from the Chronicle, which referred to a morals cleanup in Menlo Park and referred to the bar as a homosexual hangout. There are some records of the bar later in 1962, but it appears to have closed later the same year. The LCE News, the first gay newspaper in San Francisco, referred to the raid as a crucifixion without nails. The editor of the paper went down to Menlo Park from San Francisco and conducted interviews with people on the street to see if it bothered them having a gay bar in town, and the majority didn't care. This is the Sultana restaurant, which is the site where the Carriage Bar was in 1962. This is Jose Julio Sarria, who performed operas at the Black Cat, where Tom Gunn went, in San Francisco, and who went on to form the drag organization, the Imperial Court System. As a teen, he lived in Redwood City, and he graduated from high school here. He was the first openly gay person in the United States to run for political office, probably the world, in 1961 for supervisor of San Francisco, and he got over 20,000 votes. Shortly after this, I should mention, politicians started going to the gay bars to try to raise political money and votes as well. This is Sarria as the Widow Norton. He led pilgrimages to the Emperor Norton's grave annually dressed as the Widow Norton. By the late 60s, things had changed for bars on the peninsula. They no longer got raided and closed. Dino and Tills, here in an ad from the Vector magazine in 1969, was at 2651 El Camino Real. The site later became the Cruiser, the Answer, Revenge, a dance bar, and Boomers. It ceased being a gay bar in 1986.
What city was that in?
Redwood City.
Right here, okay.
Is that, excuse me, is that the one that was northwest corner of Woodside Road in El Camino?
I believe so.
Sort of.
Yeah, yeah. And it was there for over 20 years under various names. This is a list of Tavern Guild bars, and the Tavern Guild was a gay bar association started in San Francisco in the early 60s to fight police harassment, which had tickets to the Empress Crowning, which was a royalty event associated with Jose Julio Sarria's group. And this is from 1969, and these were the bars on the peninsula that had tickets. Two things of note here. One is that the locker room is mentioned in Palo Alto, and the locker room, which I'm going to mention in connection with a composer in a bit, had been open since 1966. And the Hive is mentioned there on Middlefield Road. The Hive was a women's bar. And you will note here that this is the first time in my talk that I'm mentioning lesbians. And because of less interaction with law enforcement, there were no crime articles associated with lesbians from earlier than this on the peninsula. There is an article that I found from the 50s in San Francisco where a man was trying to bother women in one of the bars in San Francisco, and he wound up in unhappy circumstances, shall we say. He got slashed with a bottle by one of the women in the bar. But on the peninsula, there was no such thing going on. I have unsuccessfully looked for biographical material on lesbians living on the peninsula earlier than this, and it remains a good area for research. This is the composer Lou Harrison. In his biography, it refers to his going to a gay bar in Palo Alto in the mid-60s, which is probably the locker room. There is a brief mention from his biography published in 2017 of this, and I'm going to read it now. I would note that Harrison was working as a dance accompanist in Palo Alto in 1966. He would work all day, sometimes 8 or 9 classes in a row, then repair to a Palo Alto gay bar he knew, order a pitcher of beer, and later drive to his mother's house to sleep. He was his caregiver for his mother at the time. The steady income was welcome, but made working on other compositions difficult. Since I am improvising 18 hours a week, it exhausts my modest musicality. I am painting and making mobiles and learning etching for creative pleasure now, he wrote to Henry Cullen. So, a friend of Henry Cullen, who we talked about a little earlier. This is an, okay, let's see, I got ahead of myself here. Okay, yeah. This is a review of Dino Till's and the Locker Room from Vector magazine from 1969. And it's in this review that I found the mention that the Locker Room had existed from 1966. And this is a notice of the opening of the Golden Door Sauna in Palo Alto in 1967. And oftentimes when we're saying Palo Alto, we're coming very close to East Palo Alto. It's right on the border of Palo Alto and East Palo Alto, in the area that was referred to as Whiskey Gulch. It was the first gay bathhouse I found to mention on the peninsula. And if you look at this article, you can see that it says, friends JJC and WP have transformed the old Palo Alto steam baths. So this was early enough that people were hiding their names in publications. It remained open until 1973. And this, the Gold Sheet, is a publication from the Society for Individual Rights, which was a gay rights organization, gay and lesbian rights organization that opened in San Francisco in 1964. And they also published Vector magazine, which I've been putting up advertisements from as well. This is an ad announcing the opening of Bachelor Quarters Bathhouse on University at Bayshore from the October 1971 Bay Area Reporter. This bathhouse remained open until 1985, when market forces forced its closure due to AIDS. On the peninsula, unlike in San Francisco, there were no laws enforcing bathhouse closures. Excuse me for just a moment. This is an ad for the ultimately the site of Dino and Tills, from Vector magazine in 1970. And this is a column from the Bay Area Reporter from 1971. I don't know if you can make it out there, but it's called Peninsular Gossip. The peninsula was lively enough that it merited its own column. This one mentions the cruiser, the Beehive, which was also a name of the hive, and the cabaret in Redwood City. And it also mentions the social service agency, the Peninsula Gay Switchboard, which was an information and helpline. The Gay People's Union was an organization formed in Palo Alto in 1972. It became the Gay and Lesbian Student Alliance of Stanford in 1984. This is an announcement in Vector from May of 1970 for the opening of a 3-story show bar in Redwood City called Le Cabaret. The opening was attended by Jose Julio Sarria, who was making his comeback to Redwood City in royal garb, and the Royal Court of San Francisco. The peninsula had its own royal court beginning in 1971. This article from the Fort Lauderdale, Florida magazine David features the 1973 Tsarina Ball, where a Grand Tsar and Grand Tsarina were crowned. The article has pictures of the Grand Tsarina, Billy Diamond, on the left-hand side, Tsar D. Townsend, Tsarina Nikki Nichols, Nikki Nations, Tsarina number 3, Nikki Nations in the center, and the owners of the hive, Pat Duncan and Norma Nelson. And I've looked for further information on Pat Duncan and Norma Nelson and have not found it in Ancestry. In 1970, an organization called the Psalmicist Society, based in Menlo Park, began publishing material and holding meetings. It was an organization for, as they were then called, transvestites and transsexuals who wanted to socialize with women. So they considered themselves what we would today call transgender feminists. This article, with the unfortunate title there, is from a 1975 San Mateo Times article, and it features a picture of the group's founder, Sally Ann Douglas, on the right-hand side. Sally Ann Douglas disappears from the public record in the 1980s. I've spoken with the transgender historian Susan Stryker, and she says that no one has been able to find information about what happened to her.
Wow.
So, and this is the article from the San Mateo Times, and it notes that the group had moved from Menlo Park to Mountain View by 1975. The history of this organization, which existed until the 1990s and moved to Canada eventually, would be a great topic for research.
Hey, Michael, excuse me. It said in Millbrae. Whereabouts in Millbrae?
This was, they were meeting at a, okay, let's see.
Oh, yeah, eventually,
It's the restaurant that they're talking about there. So, El Rancho Inn is
Right.
where they were meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, there were other businesses aside from bars and baths on the peninsula. By 1978, The Advocate, which was a national gay magazine, moved to San Mateo. And I should note that a late friend of mine worked at an advertising company called AdMail in Burlingame, and they did inserts in publications, and she said that they did inserts for the Advocate in the 1970s. So they brought business to the peninsula as well. And this is a copy of one of their 1984 issues from when the Advocate was on the peninsula. By the mid-1980s, Entre Nous, a lesbian magazine based in San Jose, began covering peninsula life. Here is an article on the opening of Two Sisters Bookshop in Menlo Park in 1988. The grand opening was on June 18, 1988, and it was at 605 Cambridge, which is kind of a strip mall area in the southern part of Menlo Park. Two Sisters provided a non-bar environment for women to meet on the peninsula, which, you know, I mean, was important because it took it sort of, and it also put it in a bookstore context, so it was more of a social interaction place. And here is a list of the types of social interactions that took place at Two Sisters. PWG, which was the Peninsula Women's Group, met there. Also, on the right-hand side, a group for lesbian parents met there. And on the bottom right, the Stanford women's basketball away game was televised in their shop as well. This is Billy DeFrank. Billy DeFrank was an activist and a performer who has the center in San Jose, the LGBT center in San Jose is named for him. He often performed on the peninsula. In fact, the day before he died of a heart attack. He was performing on the peninsula. And he was an activist as well as a performer. In August of 1981, B Street in San Mateo opened. It was actually two bars. One, a disco, was downstairs, and it had a stage where performers could perform, and musicians as well as comedians performed there. And upstairs was a women's bar named Sassy. In October, the Bay Area Reporter had a review of the bar and restaurant. And this is the only picture that I have of the interior of a gay bar from the peninsula in the presentation. So I'm glad that they published that. The first year they were open, they had a benefit from Measure B in Palo Alto, which would have prohibited discrimination in housing, employment, and business services. Unfortunately, it lost by 18 points. This is the Gay Liberation Sculpture, which is on Stanford's campus and was installed in February 1984 and immediately vandalized in March of 1984 and again in May of 1994. And it's by the sculptor George Siegel, who has the same name as the actor, but I assure you they are different people. The Whiskey Gulch neighborhood in East Palo Alto was very socially active in the 1980s. Here is a crime prevention rally they had in 1983 where they invited the guardian angels to give them a self-defense training. And it was also the garden, which was a restaurant, and bachelor's quarters closed off the street for the event. In the mid-80s, there were a number of homophobic attacks on bars on the peninsula. This one is from January of 1985, and it was an incident where a flasher stood out front of B Street and flashed the entire bar. What the point was is beyond me, but in 1986, in April of 1986, attackers attempted to enter the bar, and when they were blocked, they tried battering down the door of B Street. But B Street persevered and had a variety of entertainment events at both bars. This is from 1989. And the highlighted section is a happy hour for the Bay Area career women's upstairs at Sassy. That's a dance troupe on the right-hand side, and that's the late comedian Danny Williams in the left upper corner there. So it was a pretty lively place. I actually went there in the 80s myself when I was working in Foster City. And here's a picture of the empty bar as it exists today. In 1986, Boomers, which is the place where Dino and Tills was, and also the Cruiser, so it had been a gay bar since 1968. They threw out a couple for same-sex dancing after the bar went straight. They were sued, and as a result, they closed within a year. It's hard not to see these incidents as a reaction to the AIDS crisis. Incidentally, if you look at these numbers, 89 and 1990, these are deaths from AIDS. 105 in 91 to a peak of 124 in 1994. I think it would be worth looking to see whether or not these numbers are artificially downpressed or declined because of people who were on the peninsula who wound up going to either Stanford, so they were in Santa Clara County when they died, or up to San Francisco to UCSF and San Francisco General, because at the time they would have died there instead of dying in San Mateo County. And sadly, this is the panel for Nikki Nations, who we saw earlier in the Grand Tsarina pageant. And there's the AIDS Memorial's web address, which you can look up the names of people who died. Okay. Several AIDS service organizations sprang up on the peninsula in the 80s. Here's a 1987 article about Ellipse, an AIDS care organization. The Whiskey Gulch bars also contributed to the effort. Here's an article, and on the right-hand side you can see up there, on Sunday the Gulch will begin hosting a flea market beginning with at 8 a.m. All proceeds go to the San Mateo County AIDS Project. So bars were pitching in as well. And also in the mid-80s, San Mateo LGBTQ politicians made advances. In 1987, Tom Nolan became president of the county's Board of Supervisors, which made him the holder of the highest elected position of any openly gay politician in California at the time. And now we skip forward a bit to 2000, and not too far from here on Broadway, when Shouts, the last LGBTQ bar in San Mateo, closed. I went to Shouts when I started working at Menlo Park Library. And in December of 2021, the Lavender Dragon bookstore, which had originally been the Two Sisters bookshop, closed. And at the time, the women who ran it attributed it to the rise of online bookstores like Amazon. This is an LA Times article from 2006, and it gives the notion that some had towards the former gay neighborhood, calling it a seedy strip of dive bars, local liquor stores, and rundown apartment buildings known for drug sales and gang violence. I'm often asked why there are no gay bars in San Mateo County. It's a complex question. It has to do with gentrification and also with real estate prices. But it also has to do with just market forces as well. And I'm going to read you a segment from a book that I reviewed not too long ago called The Bars Are Ours, which has some information generally about bars that's interesting. The culture and sites of drinking in the United States changed profoundly after World War II. Whereas in the late 1940s, Americans consumed about 90% of their alcoholic beverages at public venues, by the early 1980s, that figure had plummeted to about 30%. The number of drinking establishments correspondingly shrank during this period. The general turn away from public drinking towards domesticity and mainstream society was likely a product of reorientations towards the nuclear family, single home, and suburban sprawl. Life choices that were unavailable or untenable to many queer people. These trends continued between the 1980s and 1990s. The frequency with which people went to bars and nightclubs further declined by approximately half, as did the total number of venues. These figures correspond to numerous data sets indicating pervasive societal disengagement from civic participation in the second half of the 20th century. Strikingly, as bars in general declined, the number of gay bars grew exponentially. Given that gay bars would have figured in the overall tally of bars, the drop in straight bars was even more precipitous than the statistics imply. The stark divergence in these parallel bar scenes indicates that bars served different and essential purposes for LGBTQ people, even if the majority of LGBTQ people never frequented bars. And what I would point to in talking about this change in bar culture are two incidents which happened on the peninsula while I've been working down here. And one was the objections to the BBC in Menlo Park, which closed it for a while, and the objections to the Carlos Club in San Carlos, which wanted to expand itself. So neither of those were gay bars, but bars are considered problematic to neighbors, and with NIMBYism being what it is, bars have problems, both gay as well as straight bars. But where the private sector fell down, the public sector came in to help. This is a press release from the Health Department in San Mateo County about the 4th annual Pride in 2016. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that tomorrow is Pride in San Mateo County, and there is a Pride event happening in Central Park in San Mateo tomorrow. And in 2017, the LGBT Center opened. And this is an example from 2021 of the programs that are available online. And they're still available. This is just a 2021 calendar that I grabbed. The current calendar is available at sanmateopride.org/events. As of 2020, all of the cities in San Mateo County were observing Pride Month. And also in 2020, San Carlos became the first city on the peninsula with an out lesbian mayor. And I would point out that the peninsula should have a considerable amount of pride about this, because it's something that neither San Francisco or San Jose has been able to do. And there are still businesses on the peninsula, like Reach and Teach Books in San Carlos, which serve the community. Reach and Teach is an educational bookstore, and they do have a section on LGBTQ and gender books. And that's the end of my talk. I do have my sources listed, and I also have the databases used. And if there are questions, I'll be glad to
They
answer.
were in San Mateo for many years. You know,
They were in
so
San Mateo for,
25th, on 25th? Yeah.
yeah, on 25th, and
Right.
they moved to San Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
Other questions?
You know that the book you referred to, the bars are open?
The bars are ours.
Well, the bars are ours, thank you. Is that bars in general, or were they gay, lesbian? Is it?
It's gay and lesbian bars, and it's a very good book. I'll actually go, yeah, there it is, right there.
Yeah.
I did a review of this book. The one thing that I will warn you is that it's from Duke University Press, so it is a little pricey.
Yeah.
But it's the subtitle is Histories and Cultures of Gay Bars in America, 1960 and After. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Go ahead.
Does your work center on basically white communities, or does it also include communities of color?
It includes communities of color, and that's I have attempted to include people like Jose Julio Sarria, as well as Billy DeFrank, who were in the community as well. What I would say is that although it is not explicit, the Whiskey Gulch bars were mixed communities of color in the 1980s as well. So it's not explicit, but yes, it does include both. Sure.
How does our religious, Christian and beyond Christian community in the peninsula dealt with all of this? Because in my case, United Methodist, our church has gone through this whole split.
Right.
Can you speak to that at all? Where you've seen it occur?
It's really not something that I researched a lot. I do know that that the UCC in San Mateo is an open congregation and has a gay pastor on it, and also that that one of the people who was with MCC, who was in San Francisco, has moved down to the peninsula and is at a peninsula church as well.
You referred to the LCE News?
LCE News.
What's that stand for, LCE?
League for Civic Engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah. It was one of those things. There are things like LCE as well as the Bay Area Career Women, which sort of, as they say, were hiding their candy, as it were. So
Right.
they were not explicitly saying what they were. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. I very much appreciate it.